I really, really love the intro music. I'm getting used to that, but every time it really pumps me up. So, welcome everyone. Daily Dev, episode number 25. This is the first episode of the 2023. We have two amazing speakers today. We have big news. So, welcome Jordan, welcome Ryan. Sound check, and then we'll start. Hi everyone. Yeah, sound check. Are you there?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay,
Hello.
amazing. Nice. Heading course. Amazing. Insane opening. Yes, Tomer. Wow. Yes, this is episode number 25. And yes, so a short recap of what the Monthly Dev is. It's an event, unsurprisingly monthly, for developers where we have top-class speakers, we have technical talks, inspirational talks. Today we are focused on frameworks and meta frameworks. We will go first with Jordan and then Ryan. But before we start, it's time to brag. So I'm sorry, but give us just a couple of seconds. But last week it has been crazy for us because we were almost done. It was exactly 1 week ago, 5 p.m. I said, okay, so my day is over. And then Product Hunt announced the winners of the Golden Quitty Awards. Someone compared them to sort of Oscars for products. So maybe it's not that high, but still it has, for someone, it's really a value. And so I went for a walk. I came back, said, but maybe they were announcing the winners. I checked the Slack, there was silence. I said, okay, so let me check. Probably let's see if at least we did something. We was at least the second, third place. So just to give you an idea, the product of the year is ChatGPT. We are also planning a Twitter space with that. And if I can find it, on the community and socials, there is a well-known logo for us. And so basically we won this. We made videos, announcements, Twitter space. We went crazy on this. So let us brag. The best way for us to start this 2023. And yes, super happy. Also because Daily Dev is going into this direction of community and social. So we will be more socials in 2023. So perfect. Amazing. Okay, enough bragging. So now let's talk about the talks. So we will go first with Jordan and then Ryan. So Ryan, see you later. Okay, and bye. So let me remove. So Jordan, how are you? How's it going? Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, it's going really good. I'm with the comments. The opening music is excited. I feel like I want to go like work out now, or like do something exciting, right? And then that followed up with the announcement of your Product Hunt and award winning. I mean, I feel like the bar is set pretty high here for this talk. So, but I'm excited. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Jordan is Google developer expert, self-taught software engineer, is passionate about writing good code. I'd like to ask maybe what does it mean? He's also very experienced in freelance software development, marketing also, so many things. And you work as a developer experience engineer at Cypress.io. We used Cypress, so I know the framework. So maybe you can also give a brief introduction for who doesn't know that. And you're also CEO and co-founder for the nonprofit Dream On Global. I saw an incredible picture. So Jordan, a small introduction, and then we start with the talk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned most of it. Mostly, just really excited. I love to teach people, and with my nonprofit, I travel around the world, and I do humanitarian efforts and things like that. But one of the things I do is I mentor developers who are learning how to code in other countries. So it's something I'm very passionate about. But yeah, just overall, really excited to be here and hopefully be able to teach some of your audience some of the exciting things we're building at Cypress, and hopefully it'll help add some value to their teams.
Absolutely. Can I share your screen so we can start?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, nice. We are ready. So, Jordan, best of luck. I will collect the questions. So at the end of this presentation, we will have 5-10 minutes. Today we're more relaxed because we have just 2 speakers. This doesn't mean that they are not top class, but we have a bit more time. So feel free to drop all the questions you want, and see you in 25-30 minutes. Okay. Thank you so much, Jordan. Good luck. Best of luck. Bye-bye. Bye.
Perfect. Thanks. So today's talk, I normally do a lot more kind of teaching and slides and things like that, but I honestly feel like the best way to show off how to do like API testing with Cypress is to really just like actually build it. And it's also what we're going to do is basically we're going to use TDD to actually go about doing it. So for those of you who are not familiar with that, you'll kind of see how that works in practice. But first of all, to get started, I'm going to go ahead and create, hopefully you can see this. I'm going to be using Nest.js, which is like essentially it's a way to build server like APIs and that type of thing, but it's written on top of Express and Node, but it's very similar to like Angular if you're familiar with Angular. And as an Angular GD, I have a lot of experience with Angular, and I think it's a really easy way to demonstrate how to do API testing really, really quickly. So we're going to use Nest, but you don't have to have any understanding of Nest to like really have any context of like how to actually do this. So I'm going to go ahead, and I just showed you, and this is from start to scratch. So what I just did was just use the CLI to generate a new project in Nest. And from here, out of the box, this gives you a basic controller and everything you need to know. So the first thing we'll need to do to get started is we need to actually install Cypress. And we're going to install an additional dependency called Cypress Plugin API. And Cypress Plugin API is a plugin built by one of our Cypress ambassadors called Philip Herrick, who basically made it so you could basically do API testing at a kind of like a better level. And so that's what I'm excited to kind of demo that, but also just kind of show how you can use Cypress to write tests. For those of you who are not familiar with Cypress, Cypress is a tool that's been around for a really long time, about 8 years. And Cypress historically has been an end-to-end testing tool. The thing that separates it between other end-to-end testing tools or browsing tools like Selenium or Playwright is that it actually runs in the browser, and there's certainly some trade-offs with that, but for the most part, I believe it's the most closest way you can test that is close to your users. And so I know that Francesco mentioned that he had used Cypress about 3 years ago. Cypress has changed a lot since then, and now you can actually do multiple different types of testing. You can do something called E2E testing, which is kind of what people are most familiar with Cypress with. And we also have built something called component testing, which is something I'm also very passionate about, but won't have time to get into that today. But we're going to go ahead, in order to do API testing, we're going to select end-to-end testing. And at this point, Cypress will configure our project with everything it needs. We can pick our browser of our choice, and those are just the browsers that are identified on my machine. And at this point, everything is ready to run. We're running Cypress, but we don't find any tests because we haven't written any tests. But the first thing we need to do is we need to go to this config file that Cypress generated for us, and we need to basically tell Cypress the base URL for our API. So what we're going to do is give it a base URL, and the base URL for our API by default in Nest is localhost 3000. So now Cypress is going to go ahead and reload. Anytime you make a change to the config file, it automatically reloads. And we need to go ahead and tell Cypress that we want to use that plugin that we installed. So here in our support file, we need to basically give it Cypress plugin API. So at this point, if I run this, we have everything we need to get set up and running. we can go ahead and use this create new spec feature, which will give us what we need. So today, let's go ahead and let's we're going to create an API that returns customers. So let's go ahead and create a customer test. And this is going to give us, this is going to go ahead and run this test, but it's just using a default, like writing like a default end-to-end test, which is something that we're not going to cover in today's talk, but it gives you sort of the nomenclature of how to do this. And let me go ahead and zoom this in a bit. Hopefully this helps. So at this point, we already said we're going to create customer. So we need to basically write a test that describes what we want to do. So in this case, we want to test our customer API. And we want to then say that we want to validate that it should get a list of customers when we call that endpoint. So at this point, we're going to use all Cypress commands are prefaced by the sci preface, and then we're going to use sci.api. And at this point, we're going to give it the route that we're going to first call. So this is going to be the route that we're going to use, and we're going to follow like RESTful principles and how we create this API. And at this point, we're going to tell it, we're going to pass it the endpoint of customers, and then we're going to give it an alias. So at this point, we're just telling Cypress that, hey, I want to reference this response later and using this alias, and that's how this as is done. And we'll do this over and over again. And then Cypress, we're going to use the sci.get, which is how you basically select things, whether it be aliases or elements from a DOM. In this case, we're not going to be querying things on the DOM. We're actually just going to be using sci.get to reference our alias. And the way you do that is using this @ sign. So now by using sci.get and at the response, which is what we named our request, we can then do assertions against it. So we can say that not its response, but like its status should equal like 200. So this is like a pretty basic test. And if we run this, it's going to fail because, and this is the sort of TDD pattern that we want to get in. Well, right now it's currently, we haven't built it, so it's failing, right? So a couple things we want to do is we can close this and we want to go to our actual Nest project, and we need to create a customer controller, which we don't have. So let's go ahead and open up a second terminal here, and let's use the we're going to use the Nest CLI, which will just generate these things for us simple. So we're going to use Nest generate a controller, and we're going to call it customers. And at this point, we will see a customers folder created and a controller right here. And at this point, if we close this, we'll now see it's using this. If you've ever seen Angular, Nest uses a sort of like decorator way of basically scoping and defining requests. So like this, basically this is anything with a customers would be like /customers would be here. And then you can do things like we wrote a test about getting a list of customers. So what we would do is we would then create a method that is going to be like a get request, and we're going to use the get decorator, which comes from Nest, and we're going to create a method called get customers, and it's going to be an empty param or empty method because we don't need to pass anything to get the list of customers. And in this case, we're just going to just manually create this data. We're going to say customer has a name, and I'll use my own name for now. And we're going to say, is the customer a premium? And it's going to be a Boolean. So in this case, we're going to say yes. So now if I go back to my Cypress tests and run this, our test is still going to fail. And that's because we aren't running our API. So what we need to do next is we need to open up a third tab, and we need to basically run npm run start dev, which is the default command that Nest created for us that basically starts the API. And so at this point, we have a tab that's running our API, and you can see this customer's controller's data is getting logged. We have a tab that we use to generate our Nest controller, and we have a tab using to run Cypress. So at this point, if I go and refresh this now, I'll now see. Let's see. Is it running? Let's see. It's status. I must have wrote something wrong. What did I do? Okay, this is what's helpful about TDD. So now it's saying that expected the status to equal. What did I write? Let's see. We expected the status should equal 200. That should be, oh, I did as, so I need to do its status. So the response's status should be 200. So again, this is the TDD sort of workflow that we really want to get in the habit of working, which APIs are a really great use case for this. So as you can see, we have a working test, but it's not that valuable. We're just inlining some data. So let's go ahead and use, let's go ahead and create a service that will actually handle this as like handle all of our customer logic. So in this case, we're going to use the Nest CLI again to generate a service called customers, and that's going to go in the same customers folder, and you'll see it right there. So if I open that, so at this point, we need to do a couple things. I need to first create an interface called customer, and we're going to give it an optional ID because sometimes we don't have an ID and sometimes we will, because if we're like posting, creating a new customer, we don't have an ID at that point. The next thing we want to do is we had a name, which is a string, and whether they are a premium customer or not is a Boolean. So in this case, we have an interface defining our customer, and let's go ahead now and create a constant called, let's call it default customer of type customer, and we're going to give it an ID of 1. We're going to give it a name of Jordan Powell and premium of true. So at this point, we now want to go into our class itself, and we want to create a private method called customers, and this is going to be a customer array, and we're going to assign it to this default customer. So at this point, we're using this customer to basically be the initial value for our list of customers. And then what we did is we had a method to get a list of customers. So let's create a method called get customers. And again, it doesn't take in any parameters. It returns a list of customer. And at this point, we can do return this.customers, just like that. That's really simple. So now we can go back to our controller. Instead of doing this sort of thing, we can now inject our service, if I can spell it right, customer service. And in here, my typings are all messed up, but return this dot customer service dot get customers. So now if I go back to my test and rerun it, we still want it to, it should still pass, which is a good thing. So now we wrote a test before we wrote the code, it was failing. We then wrote a test to get it passing, and we refactored to show that it's still passing. So this is sort of the TDD life cycle that you can do really well with this type of testing. All right, so now we have our first test written, but that's not like that useful of an API. We need to write some additional tests. So we need to say that we should be able to get a single customer. So oftentimes we don't want to get an entire list of customers, and quite frankly, that could be a really exhaustive list of customers. So we're going to use the ID as a way to do that. And so we're going to give it a alias again. We're going to then reference that response, and we're going to say its status should equal 200. And we can do some additional things that says sci.get the response, and we can say that its body should include, and then we could say the body should equal a specific thing. So we could say that the body should include 1, and we're expecting the name to be Jordan Powell and it to be premium, and we'll say false for the sake of this. And then we can go down and we need to update our service, which instead of getting a list of customers, we want to get a single customer. So we could do get customer, and we're going to pass it an ID, which we'll use to return the single customer. We want to then we're going to do something like this where we say get customer, type customer, or we don't really need to add types. We could just say this.customers.find, and we're going to say the customer ID is equal to the ID we pass it. And then we can just return the customer. So we now have a way to get a single customer, but now we need to go and add a method in our controller. So we can also, inside this get parameter, because this is another get request, we can pass it this in ID, which is basically saying, hey, I want to make a get request, but it's going to also have an ID parameter. And so here we could say get customer is the method, and we're going to use the param decorator here, and we're going to say we're going to expect an ID, and we're going to use something called parse int pipe, which comes with nest. And basically, because we serialize the data coming across, it's going to be basically look like a string. So this is a way to convert that into an actual into a number. And then then we can say, hey, it's an ID of number. I'm going to return a customer, and then say return this customer service, get customer, pass in the ID. So now if I save this, it's going to run, but I think I told it to had the wrong, I think I return customer. I get sorry. Customer. What did I name this? I might have get customer. Let's see. Customer service dot get customer. There we go. And what is it not returning a customer? Uh-oh. This is why we don't live code. Get customer. I didn't import that type. Sorry, that's why. Okay, now if I save this, I rerun this, and it's going to say it expected for it to include premium false, but we really set premium true. So if I change this back to true, this will now pass. Okay, perfect. So now we're getting a list of customers. We're getting back a single customer. But now we need to do something like, what happens if you don't find a customer? We want to return a certain response. And so we need to handle those types of cases. So we can now do something like we want to check that it should throw a 404 if a single customer is not found. And here I can use side API, and we're going to use the object instead of just passing in the parameters. And so in this case, I'm going to give it a URL, and I want to call customers, and I'm going to pass it an ID I definitely don't have, which is like say 100. And we're going to use fail on status code false. So by default, our API is going to, our tests are going to fail if we don't get a 200 style request. But in this case, we want to validate that it throws a 400. So we need to tell it to not fail when it gets that type of response. And then I need to then give it an alias. So now I can do site get at response, if I spell it right. And I want to say that its status should equal, and then 404. So now if I run this test, again, this will throw, or will fail, because we don't throw an error in those cases where we don't have a customer. So here, instead of, we aren't making any checks to see if the ID doesn't match. So we could easily just add one check that says, if there is no customer, then I want to throw a new, what's it called? Null not found exception. And like this. So now if I rerun this, it threw an exception, and now my test is passing. So this is how we can handle specific throwing errors and validating that those errors are being caught, that sort of thing. That's a very important use case. All right, so now that we're getting a list of customers, we're checking getting to get a single customer and then throwing errors if we don't have a customer. We now want to validate that we can create a customer, because that's an important thing. We want to be able to add customers to our business. So let's write a test that says it can we'll just say add a customer. And in this time, we need to first create a constant that will pass in the body. We're going to import customer from our service. And we don't have an ID because we don't know the ID we want to assign it. We want our service to do that for us. So we're going to first just give it a name, and we're going to call it whatever, Ernie Ball. We're going to then give it a premium of false, because they're a new customer. They're not a premium customer yet. And so at this point, we want to make an API request using SIDA API. And by default, we weren't passing the type of request before because it defaults to get. But in this case, we want to make a post request. So we need to pass it an argument of post. And then in this case, we want to pass it to the customer's endpoint. And we want to pass it that customer we just created. And we're going to give it an alias. And then now we can then reference that alias. And we can say that its status. You should start to see kind of like a pattern with a lot of this, which is really cool. And we want to make sure the status is 201, which means that we successfully created this. And we want to get the response. And we want to make sure that its body, I can type, includes the customer that we just passed it. So now if we run this test, again, it's failing because we haven't built it yet. So let's go to our customer service and let's build this thing. So let's go ahead and create a method called add customer. And it's going to take in a customer, and we're going to return a customer. Now, the one thing, like we mentioned, is we're not passing an ID because we don't know what ID to give it. So we need to basically get the ID of the customers and then give it one more, just kind of like a way to increment it. So we can do something like const new ID, and we could say it's equal to like math.max. Then we can spread this customers map x and x.id, and then we can say +1. Maybe did I do this wrong? There you go. So now we have a way to get increment the ID. So now we want to say that customer.id is equal to the new ID we just created. Then we want to get our list of customers and inside of our service. We want to then push this customer to that array, and we want to return that customer back. So now if we go to our controller, we can use, instead of the get decorator, we can use the post decorator. Here we can then say add customer, and we're going to use add the body decorator here because we're going to be passing the customer in the body of our request, and we're going to say we're returning a customer. And so here all we need to do is say this.return customer service add customer, pass it the customer. Now, oops, looks like I need to import post from Nest. So now if I save this, rerun our tests, and you can see we now have a successful test passing. So hopefully this kind of gives the sort of feedback loop of what you're wanting. And let me zoom in a little bit more to the Cypress, so you could see this a little bit better. You get this really almost, it almost looks like Postman or Swagger or something like this. So you have access to all the things that you have access to, what was in the body, what came back in the response, the status, how long it took, the headers, cookies, all the types of things that you are like going to consume as a consumer of the API, but it's really easy to do in Cypress. So yeah, I just find this way of, it's like very, 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 very sort of interactive way of TDDing and creating an API. And at this point, we have tests for getting all the customers, getting a single customer, throwing a 404 when we don't have a customer, and adding a customer. Again, we could go in and we would want to write tests about deleting and that sort of thing. But at this point, I don't want to belabor the point. And I know that we have Ryan has a talk coming up here, but at this point, I'll answer any questions. Hopefully, this gives kind of a quick overview, really, really fast, in a high level live situation of how easy it is to hopefully create an API, but like test it along the way and do TDD, because I feel like APIs are a really good use case for TDD, because it's a pretty, you know exactly what you're expecting when you're creating it. When you create an endpoint, you know exactly what you want to pass it, what you want it to return. And so it's a really good use case for doing this type of testing. So at this point, do we have any questions?
Can you hear me now? Yeah, I can help here. First of all, congratulations for your presentation, and also being cold-blooded and concentrated. I love that. I was really cheering for you in the back. So first of all, a couple of compliments. Really cool, nice demo, very helpful, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. And now we have some questions. So I'll just collect them for you. So let's start with probably one of the hard one, which is Cypress can be used for automation like Selenium.
Yeah, so basically Cypress was created as an alternative really to Selenium and tools like that. But the main difference with Cypress is basically Selenium and things like other automation tools like Playwright, they sit outside of the browser, and they basically send requests to the browser via an API and then tell the browser, go do something, right? Which can be an effective way of testing. It can be a really fast way of testing, but there are some trade-offs with that form. The thing that Cypress basically did was sort of invert that idea and basically put Cypress inside of the actual browser. So one thing that I didn't really get into, but if like Cypress is essentially just an actual browser that runs. So here you could see you have access to all the dev tooling that you're used to. You have access to console logs. You have access to network traffic. And so if I rerun this, you'll see like, you would see like requests to, our APIs and things like that. So that's the thing, is like you have access to all those things because you're actually in the browser. And I like to say it like, Cypress or like other tools like Selenium automate the browser, where Cypress really automates your application. So there's some trade-offs to it. But yes, it's definitely used for automation, and you can use like it for, it's very good at like traditional end-to-end testing. And then we just came out with component testing, which is a really awesome way to write really easy tests for your components without doing all the like mocking and all the things that you hate doing as a developer when you're writing tests. So hopefully that answers your question.
I think yes, Oliver. Please reply in the chat if you're still there. And yes, I also used the Nest.js, so I was able to follow along with this in this presentation. Thank you. Yeah. And they asked for the link for the Cypress plugin, but I think if you type Cypress on VS Code, you can find it. Usually there is also a link.
It comes up. I will go ahead and put it in the chat. Yes. But yeah, it's really easy. Just a quick.
I think if you type Cypress or Cypress.io, yes. Someone is asking also if you are sharing the code after this presentation. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
If that's a plan.
I can send a link to that as well. This is a workshop that I've done with another coworker, and so I just used parts of it to kind of demo how to do it. So here's a link to part of that as well.
Nice. We have some questions by Tobiloba. So he's asking, I use frameworks like Jest and React Testing Library for testing. Looks like Cypress is way better than these tools. Am I right? Now asking this for you.
Yeah. So there are trade-offs with using Cypress in comparison to these things. Things like Jest are very, very fast. But I mean, I can rerun these tests, and they're also like really, really fast, right? But the value of the test that you get, I think, is much higher when you're doing this type of testing, because your users actually test your application in a browser. And so especially things like component testing, the way we normally test components is we basically test the methods of the class, or functions. If you're like using React, like some function inside of the component or something like that. But in the end, you're only testing, if you really look at what a component is, it has a template and styles and like has all these like dependencies, has all these things that you end up basically mocking. And even like Jest and things like testing library, they use a virtual DOM. So it's not even a real DOM. Whereas Cypress, it actually runs in a real browser, so you don't have to mock out things like that. You can just pass it the actual, React store, or the actual, or React Redux store. You could pass it the actual implementation instead of creating a bunch of fakes just to be able to test the logic of things. So to me, that adds a lot of value, being able to test that way. And instead of testing the methods of your class, like for example, a button, if you were to create a button, you would normally like create the component and then test like that when this button method got called, that it would output an event to a parent or something like that, or call a callback function. Where with Cypress, you wouldn't test the implementation of your code. You would just click the button, and the reaction, the side effect of clicking the button, you would then validate. And certainly you could spy on those things to validate that type of thing. But I think you get a higher level, higher value of test if you're willing to do some of the trade-offs, which is because it runs in a browser, it could be a little slower to start up. I just demoed it. I don't think it's slow, but it's not, it's just like a terminal output in Jest and things like that. But it also is like it's passing, but is it really passing? I can't see it. Like there's a little bit of abstraction there that I think that you sort of avoid when you're using Cypress. So.
Amazing, Jordan. Thank you. Now we have the same question 2 times. It's exactly the same. I wonder if we can test React or Next.js as well. Can I use Cypress in my front-end software, React Next with TypeScript?
Yeah. So, couple questions. Our first thing is, if you're using end-to-end testing, Cypress doesn't care what language. You could be using like Blazor, you could be using any type of JavaScript framework, you could be using jQuery, WordPress. It doesn't matter, because it's basically looking at the compiled output. In fact, you could point Cypress end-to-end testing at google.com or like any place and start writing tests for it. But component testing is actually coupled to the framework itself. And so those for component testing, and I showed kind of at the beginning, there's this different type of testing. You could pick component, and at this point it would say, hey, do you want to pick Vue? Do you want to pick Angular? What type of React applications felt? So you have Next.js, create React app, Vue, CLI, Nuxt. You have like all of the different meta framework flavors and that type of stuff, as well as Angular. So you can do component testing with those frameworks as well. So
nice, thank you. So if I got it right, you should create a project setup depending on the framework. So
yeah, absolutely.
Know what framework are you using? Okay, of course. This is for the component one.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Correct.
Perfect. And this one I think should be fast. Cypress makes TDD looks very fun. I'm loving this. Onto their docs after the live stream, so maybe we can link the docs. I hope I got them right, and this should be here. I don't know if you remember the link.
Yep, that's it.
Yes, we have this one. I think this is the last one. Now we have some. I don't know if it's out of the scope. Suggestions on setting that database for API test.
Yeah, so one of the things I ran out of time, but one of the things I wanted to do was basically create like a post request and then do something like reset or something like this, and then basically create a method that would like call the service, and then the service would basically call the database to reseed or something like that. Or in my case, it would just be like basically do this again, like use default customer. But then inside of your test itself, all you'd have to do is before each test, which is really cool, then you could say, hey, make a request to the reset endpoint of customers, and then before every single test, it could reset the database. So there's some really cool things. Obviously, depends upon how, like, if that's a expensive task, or I don't know how much time that takes, that would add some, add some potential time to your tests themselves. But I think that it's a good practice because you want your test to be able to run deterministically. So like, every single time, no matter what order you run them, they would work. So
amazing. Thank you so much, Jordan. This has been really an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. You handled it very, very well. Now I think it's time to say you bye. If you want, you can jump at the end if you still have time. Otherwise, have a nice day, and thank you so much for joining.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me. And like I said, I went really, really fast. So I'm sure if you have questions, feel free. You can message me on Twitter and DM me. It's at JordanPow88. Feel free to reach out to me. And I do have another talk coming. So I do have to leave, so I apologize. But feel free to reach out to me if you do have questions. So I'm going to have to go back later and listen to Ryan's talk. So.
Nice. Of course, all the links are in the description. Jordan, good luck. I think it's on the 11th of February, but I can't remember exactly where. I don't know if it's that one. And yes, so thank you so much, Jordan. Enjoy your day.
Thank you, guys.
Bye. Okay, Ryan, welcome. I'm sorry for letting you wait, but when you let people give all the questions, they took me in word, and so they started. But I think this is a very good one. We are more relaxed today. We are less strict with times. So Ryan is a principal engineer at Netlify. He has a YouTube channel. I also discovered that now he has a Twitch channel. I also saw some good videos with Theo and other people. I want to check some of them. He's of course the author of SolidJS UI library, and also in the Marco.js core team member, right? And you are from California. And today the talk is Rethinking Isomorphic JavaScript with SolidStart. Sorry for messing up the tweet, but I was sure that this was not that one. So Ryan, now please introduce yourself first, and then we'll share your PC. You're muted.
This happens when you're in the back. Yeah. But yeah, no, you did a great job introducing me already. As you said, I'm the creator of SolidJS, and I'm just here to talk about the framework and show some really cool stuff that we've been working on.
Nice. Before we start, I just wanted to ask you, because in the introduction, also in the emails, we were talking about a meta framework, right? So you will talk about a meta framework. So can you give a short introduction of what a meta framework is, and then we'll talk in details with of this one.
Yeah, which is funny because this is kind of a hot topic right now, if people have been paying attention, because a lot of these client-side libraries, frameworks started as something very simple in the sense, not very, but simpler in that they were designed to do client-rendered single-page apps, that you built apps in JavaScript that ran in the browser. The challenge is that over time, we've wanted to do more and more with them, bring in server-side rendering capabilities, and it started getting really complicated to the point that there's been a push the last several years to build something around these initial kind of render libraries that have more opinions, take more decisions off your hands, and make it easier for you to get started with best practices and to have, frankly, more capability than what the library itself provides.
Nice. Thank you so much. Now I'll share your screen. So SolidJS, Rethinking Isomorphic JavaScript with SolidStart. I also like the graphics, the style. So Ryan, good luck, and I'll collect the questions, and at the end, if you have 5-10 more minutes, we will answer them. Okay?
Awesome.
Nice. Perfect. Good luck. Bye.
All right. So, as I already said, I was a creator of SolidJS, but today we're going to talk about Solid's meta framework, which is recently released to beta called SolidStart. SolidStart is Solid's equivalent to things like SvelteKit, Remix, Nuxt, Next.js. It's a more opinionated framework to make it easier to do server-rendered web applications with Solid, but really it can be used to make any sort of application with Solid. Today isn't really going to be an introduction to SolidJS itself, but builds on my learnings from working with it the past 6 or so years. So if you aren't super familiar with SolidJS, that's okay. All you need to know is that it introduces reactive primitives to rethink the component model popularized by frameworks like React, and has been kind of dominant across frameworks in the ecosystem the last decade or so. And I guess I could say libraries or frameworks. I'll use the term kind of interchangeably. Admittedly, this is kind of a gray area even today. But what I want to get is the key takeaway for all the good component architectures abroad, and I mean they are everywhere in modern front-end developer. We've kind of conflated code organization with execution lifecycle. In pretty much every framework, components have this runtime consideration. They are our primary state management, our renderer, really our everything. And this isn't limited to just the virtual DOM. It is true for compiled solutions as non-compiled, tag template literals to virtual DOMs, single file components to the hottest new domain-specific languages or DSLs. Everything kind of runs top down. And I mean, like, I get there's a bit of who cares around this, but it informs every subsequent question. You know, what do I memoize? When do I memoize? What do I use for global state? How do I share reactivity between files? When to use effect? What's the difference between context and Redux? Why does this thing log twice? Really, why does this stupid thing keep re-rendering? And these are topics that kind of dominate the conversation these days. And I'd really rather be talking about, I don't know, pretty much anything else. There's a lot of things that are just unlocked when you change your perspective a little bit. Now, usually this is where I go off about how powerful reactivity is. I could go on about how it's declarative and composable, how it helps produce well-structured code with reusable behaviors that are independent of any component system. Even how with a few basic primitives, you can basically do everything you could ever wish for. That includes rendering. And with the performance we haven't seen since hand-optimized vanilla JavaScript. That's what SolidJS is, but it's not really why I'm here. Because there's a different recalibration going on right now. And that's around the role of the browser and server and how we build applications. To appreciate this, we need to look back a bit at our history. From my perspective, the history of web development has been sort of a game of hot potato to see who is left holding the user's state. The web started on the back end. We served static HTML files that a file server would serve on request. Soon these pages became dynamic, generated via code on request. State was kind of owned by the server. Change a piece of the UI, the whole page reloads. These days, we call this approach multi-page applications, or MPAs for short. Nothing more distinctive to me at this time was going to like a travel agency booking site and then going to some cascading drop-down menus. You'd like choose your country, reload. Select a city, reload. Choose your dates, reload, and so on. But that wasn't the only thing. As our apps got more interactive, JavaScript grew, we started to see a lot of duplication between backend and frontend, which were typically written in different languages. So I'm talking about things like templating, business logic, UI state. I don't know how many of you had the pleasure of layering your front-end logic on top of Ruby's ERB templates, but I have. And here's a little Knockout.js sitting on top of ERB. You can kind of see the duplication. Everything's being done twice. This approach actually still lives on today with things like Alpine.js and Petite Vue. But inevitably, we went a different way with the web. Now, using Knockout instead of jQuery in my last example might have been jumping ahead a little bit, but the real unlock we saw was around 2010. In the wake of Ajax making it into the browser, and the browser engines getting drastically better at executing JavaScript, more sophisticated JavaScript frameworks started appearing to make it actually feasible to build complete applications in the browser. Well, with an API. In many ways, this was a drastic simplification. Client owns a state and communicates with a stateless backend. We could author UIs as a single application, or as we know, a single page app. There's one problem. Wait for it. No, I'm kidding. This is the problem. Being fully rendered in the browser meant we loaded blank pages, then loaded the JavaScript, then started fetching data, then rendered the page. This is mostly fine for apps, but with the burst of popularity of things like React, we wanted to bring our developer experience to a wider range of sites. So let's server render it. Like that, maybe that'll solve the problem. Get fast page load and get the benefit of our single page app. And that basically kind of brings us up to date with Next.js, Nux, SvelteKit, Remix. For most of the authoring experience stays basically the same as it did with client rendering, but now everything is isomorphic. It runs on both the browser and the server. This has largely been the pinnacle of web development for the last, say, 7-ish years. However, during the same time period, I'd be remiss not to mention a different model developed. Pioneered by eBay's Marco framework as early as 2014, and popularized more recently by Astro, islands or partial hydration are an updated take on multi-page applications which have emerged. The concept is simple. Author declarative JavaScript code through identification of specific components which are interactive. We only need to send those to the browser. The key to this is that since these pages are always server rendered, we never need the JavaScript for the components that don't need to update. The benefit is we return to web pages starting at 0 kilobytes of JavaScript baseline and growing as needed while retaining our declarative views and single language mindset. The negative is that we are back to those full page reloads, and most frameworks don't actually have a means to support islands. So why does it matter? Well, even with server rendered page, the time it takes to become interactive isn't free. We still need to fetch and start up the JavaScript in the browser. And as it turns out, not everyone enjoys that gigabit internet that I have here sitting in San Jose. And not everyone is running on their sites on the latest MacBook Pros. The truth is the numbers I'm showing on screen are actually from 2017, and things have only grown since then. I'm sure you're thinking, well, aren't there ways to address this? What about code splitting? What about streaming responses? Funny enough, the latter actually probably helps MPAs more than SPAs, as now they can respond immediately on navigation instead of waiting for data, while still giving a nice loading indicator. Well, what about progressive enhancement? What about using smaller or faster JavaScript libraries? What about if we just put them all together? Yeah, that does do some stuff, but it doesn't completely solve the problem where it's relevant. What we're dealing with here, for anyone who has stared at this problem long enough, is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Basically, what can be sent to the browser shall be sent to the browser. So we have two solutions that have benefits over each other, but don't do everything we want in one package. Do we go with a better page load at the cost of future navigation, or do we go with our slower loading isomorphic approaches that feel more app-like after initial load? Do we somehow do both? Does that even make sense? What I've actually noticed is the server and client-centric approaches almost mirror each other. In a client-centric approach, the vast majority of your app is believed to be isomorphic, which means it runs on both sides. And we define patterns to denote that which things are server only. Things like get server-side props or loaders. In a server-centric approach, like islands, we do the opposite. We denote the code that is required to be ran on the client for it to be interactive. Each starts from a different base assumption and comes at the problem from opposite sides. So let's start our conversation on SolidStart, looking at how it approaches building isomorphic apps. SolidStart is very much categorized in that same area as Remix or SvelteKit, in offering an approachable experience to building that provides all the tools you need to load and mutate data in your JavaScript applications. Of course, we do this in a solid way. If you already use Solid, what you'll find is that we aren't introducing new router or libraries. We're building upon stuff that's already in the ecosystem, providing tools that can help every library in our ecosystem while still feeling first party to SolidStart. As you can imagine, that makes us all about the primitives. We want things like get server-side props and next or loaders and remix, but we don't want to compromise. And we want to keep it so all the benefits we have come to desire from being modular and composable. The pattern in Solid for the past several years has been to define a data function that is attached to each nested route section that runs in parallel to code splitting while setting up our resources for data fetching. It doesn't care whether it's on server or browser, it runs the exact same way. If left alone, it will fetch on the server during initial SSR, and then in subsequent navigation, it will fetch from the browser. But this begs the question, what if I want to always fetch on the server? Well, we had an idea. What if any function could be ran on the server? And all we would have to do is just wrap it in the server $ function to indicate that. We immediately saw that we could preserve types across the boundaries with just this, and it was really quite nice. Just define a function anywhere. You didn't need to worry about, it having your URL or API. The URL would be still available as a property on that function. So you can use it for APIs designed to take URLs. We've used it with everything from WebSockets to server-sent events. But the takeaway is suddenly we had a primitive to do network communication in, a type-safe way. So it turns out we can just plug this into our resources as well, and suddenly we have a function that always runs on the server. Nice how primitive composition works like that. And we can write a wrapper to clean this up a bit, and we're basically in business. While a little bulkier than maybe a simple async function, we get to have cool things like invalidation by key. So we can granularly invalidate these the way one would with something like TanStack query. So it turns out we can just plug this. Oh, sorry. Where was I? Right. There we go. Speaking of TanStack query, the community has already jumped on using these primitives. Solid's port of TanStack query uses our resources under the hood, which means suspense, out-of-order streaming, hydration, and even server functions all just work out of the box with zero config. Picture just dropping a create query call and querying our database right in your component. then there's the other side. What about mutations and actions? We have this mechanism where we can define actions in a very similar way. By default, they refresh the data for the current route, but they'll also granularly trigger invalidation on key. And also they provide an API for handling optimistic updates. And did I mention they export progressively enhanced forms? These work with no JavaScript. This all piles on top of each other. You can define as many of these actions you want in a file, and they are just server functions. You don't need to feel the restriction of having to adhere to a file-based API for local mutations or worrying about like over refetching on invalidation. So I actually want to take a moment and actually show you a little bit how this works. Okay, there's some examples in the SolidStart repo. So I've actually got it right here. It's going to take a little bit more time today because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using the build instead of dev mode for doing these examples because I want to show off basically how this attacks things like bundle size. So just bear with me a bit, but here we are. I'm just started up the Vite server, and what I'm going to show you is a very basic to-do MVC app. A SolidStart project kind of starts with a root TSX, where we define in JSX the document, and then we have our routes, which comes straight from the Solids router. And then if you want to use our file system routing, you can just insert that into the routes definition. From there, a to-do MVC app is pretty easy because it's all in one route. And I'm going to show how that works in a minute, but just so you know, like we're on the same page, we've all seen to-do MVC, right? Hello world. You can type into it and add a list of to-dos, and you can modify it and stuff. What you're going to see is hopefully that this stuff flickers purple for a second before it turns gray. And this is me actually showing off the optimistic updates because we can add as many of these in flight in parallel, and it all kind of just works really nicely immediately, even before the data returns. There's an artificial delay on these APIs. It's not the longest delay, but you can kind of see how this all works like a typical to-do MVC application. We can remove items as well and whatnot. So how does the authoring experience look like? Well, let me adjust this a little bit so we can see better. Essentially, we're inside our route. We've got some type definitions, and we've got some little trick for setting focus on the element. But generally, we export our route data, like I showed a minute ago, which returns us our server data, which just calls our database. Essentially, whenever it updates, it just goes get the data for the route is basically the list of to-dos. Once we're in our to-do app, we use the route data, which gets us our typed routes. And then what you're going to see here is we define a bunch of server actions. And we actually have this concept of multi-action, which allows us to have multiple in-flight actions as well, which makes it simpler to do things like the multi-adding of to-dos like I showed there. And then what you're going to see is a bunch of like calculations based on optimistic updates. Because now it's not, how many are left isn't just the remaining length, but we actually feed these actions back in. So if some to-dos are pending, or if you're removing them, we actually use that to calculate the remaining count. As you can tell, Solid looks a lot like React if you haven't seen it before. Essentially, we have some different names of primitives, and we use create instead of use because things don't re-render. But generally speaking, you're just feeding this into JSX, and then our actions actually export forms that we do most of our stuff. So here you can see we have an input form for adding the to-dos, and you'll see down here for toggling the checkbox. And if I go down further, you'll see other ones like clearing the form. At the bottom, I just defined a bunch of the stuff that I feed into the actions, things like add to do, remove to do, toggle all. These are just making database calls, and they read off the form's data and whatnot. So this is you don't have to use forms here. You can just call the action as a function if you want. Like you don't have to, where is it here? You can just call add to do and pass arguments to it. But this form API kind of connects the dots automatically. There is some trade-offs because you have to like use hidden fields if you want to pass some values through. But it's very powerful, and I'll show you why in a minute. Inside our to-do list, we actually iterate over the current to-dos, and this is Solid's for component if you haven't seen it before. And inside, we actually can define more server actions for each to-do based on key to their ID. And again, more optimistic updates getting calculated here. Essentially, like toggling. Like how do we know if it's completed? Well, if it's pending, then its completion state is actually based on the in-flight request. Otherwise, it'll fall back down to what the state of the current to-do is. But what I was trying to get to a minute ago was we go over the current to-dos, and the way we show the future to-dos is actually we just iterate over them in a second list afterwards, and this data that we're iterating over is just the form data or whatever you submit to the action. It exists for the length of the request, and you can use that to actually draw your UI. And that is how we were able to show the pending items before they're even added. And it's quite nice because this whole to-do example, yes, it's a little heavier than your typical SPA example, but it still clocks in at about 200 lines of code. And it's fully capable. I don't have all the error handling stuff in, but each action has the ability to also independently manage its errors state as well. And you might be still like, okay, well, why all this new API? I mean, as I mentioned, you can just call the function and not bother with it. Well, the real power with this, and I think people have probably seen this before, but if we disable JavaScript in our browser and do stuff here, let's just refresh to be clear. Okay, there we go. Now, when I say, what I want to say, eat breakfast, you'll see a full page reload here while it's doing the actions, but it is still capable of functioning even with no JavaScript on in the browser. And this is pretty powerful mechanism in case JavaScript doesn't load. Things can go wrong, and it's really powerful to have something like this so that your site is resilient to change. So changing these patterns a little bit gives us an incredible boon when we want to make our sites more resilient to network conditions. Now, just so I don't break our next demo, I'm going to actually enable JavaScript here for a second, make sure it's actually working again. All right, there we go. Nice. Okay, anyways, we think this is a pretty powerful mechanism for the isomorphic side of things, like for the client mentality. But you might be asking, what about things that are server-centric? Nothing you've seen so far is that different than other frameworks, except perhaps, the way we focused, on primitives so that you can get the same functionality out of things like, solid query or equivalent to React query. Well, I have good news on that front as well. I want to share with something we've been working on that's still experimental, but I think it's something worth getting excited about. I'm going to use another demo, which people are familiar with. Hacker News, PWA, was a site that collected Hacker News implementations in every framework. It's no longer maintained and most links are dead, but I myself have gone through and taken an old Vue 2 version and remade it in every framework I can find. So it's the perfect example of the demo what I want to show you today. So let's go back here and actually have the Hacker News example. So let's go in here and let's build it and start it. Okay. So Hacker News is like this. This is in Solid's blue instead of orange, but you've probably all seen variations on this demo or site. And it lists a bunch of stuff. You can click into a specific story. In our case, we're going to compress some comments. So there's a little bit of interactivity, but for the most part, the stuff is mostly static. But I want to show you something here, just so like you can get the base reference. Because as I said, this is SolidStart working normal. It's very similar to what you might have seen before, and that what you might often see is when you render a server rendered single page app, you end up serializing all the JSON for all the stories in there. So when I'm going to full page load on here, and you're going to see like all the JSON for all the comments and all the text. It's a big blob. We need it so that we can hydrate the page. And this is true. You might have seen next data or something like this is true for basically every single page app. And as you can see here, SolidStart's version is about 19 kilobytes of JavaScript. It's pretty small when you consider that this demo, in Remix or Next is more pushing on 70, 80 kilobytes of JavaScript, or Nuxt. It's similar to Svelte. I think the Svelte version is about 23 kilobytes. But essentially a small, fast framework can cut, some base size on simple demos like this. But like this is sort of where you are today. So we were like, well, what if we could do something server-centric, like make it more like you might have heard of like Marco or Astro that I mentioned before. So we were like, okay, well, we could go in here and maybe add an option that was like islands true and turn it into an MPA. The problem is we still need that comment to be interactive so we can like do the toggling and stuff. So what we were playing with, and this is not going to be the final API, was that instead of importing toggle directly, we could maybe go make our toggle component, equals unstable island. Okay. A dynamic import that's kind of marked in a special way. Okay. And toggle. Okay. And this, we could denote now that our toggle component that does that compressing is an island. And what does that mean? Well, the main app now is a multi-page app that's with all its components being server only, and it's only the toggle that is an island. What you'll notice about this toggle, which is kind of interesting, is it wraps the list of comments which have other comments in it. Like, so a comment component displays some information, and then if it has children, wraps its children in a toggle component, and then there's a loop. And what you'll notice is there's no state in this. The only state actually in the whole app is this create signal, which is Solid's kind of equivalent to use state, inside this toggle component that's used to basically open and close the stuff by applying a class. There's nothing too interesting here. But what this means is this component is the only component that really needs to make its way to the browser. So let me show you what that means or looks like. So now when I reload this page, I can do significantly less JavaScript. This is only 7.4 kilobytes. It's the main entry code plus 700 bytes for that one component. It still works. It still collapses, but we've reduced the size of our app by a third. The thing is, there's a trade-off. If I go to HN page, you'll see that I'm doing full page reloads. Like you see the whole browser do the rewind. And this just kind of comes with the territory. But on the positive, if I reload this page or on this page, you'll see that we're not serializing that big blob of JSON anymore. We don't need it to hydrate because the text here doesn't actually need to hydrate, only the toggle component that does the compression. So immediately our page weight is significantly reduced because we're not sending the data for like all of this stuff. And so our page loads are quicker. Our JavaScript and execution is way less. It's pretty powerful stuff. Okay. All right. That's pretty cool. So we can have the ability to do MPAs or single page apps, each being fully optimized for the use case. But about a year ago, I realized we could do better. What if we didn't need to choose? I realized that combining 3 existing technologies, we could maybe get it all. And these technologies are nested routing, which we've been leveraging for several years already, islands, which I just showed off, and HTML over the API, something popularized by TurboLinks, but something our good friends over at Astro have been playing with for their HMR solution. The realization struck me that I noticed what happens when you combine these technologies and change the size of our islands. Like that toggle component was one of our islands. The trick to island saving is that you only need to serialize the data that is passed in as props, right? The toggle didn't have any props. It didn't need to serialize any data. So typically with this architecture, as you navigate, you'd just be only needing to worry about sending the HTML for the white stuff and then the props, for the green stuff. But if the whole nested section was a giant island, then we'd only need to serialize the props. So in a sense, we've gone from the extreme of MPA style, as if we can add client routing that sends HTML, to basically JSON APIs if the whole thing was interactive. It basically becomes both versions at both ends of the spectrum. So in this sense, it scales from ultra minimal JavaScript islands with HTML over the wire to SPAs we have today with the props acting as that JSON API. No additional overhead for either case at the extremes. You don't need two modes or switch. It's a continuous range. And sorry, went too far. We can enable this in our experimental thing with just one more switch. We can just go islands router true, okay? And I'm going to rebuild really quickly here. Again, I'm using dev build so I can actually show the actual size and stuff. At basically, okay, 7.6. At basically no cost of extra JavaScript, we essentially are back to our scenario where we're compressing the comments and whatnot. But let me show you something. This is now doing client-side navigation. This isn't doing full page refreshes. And this demo might not be quite cool enough to show this off completely. But if you've seen Taste.js Movies app, they've made in the communities from all the JavaScript frameworks: Next, Angular, Nux, SvelteKit, Lit, Quick. And this is Solid's version. This version looks like a typical single page app. It's interactive. You can move around, you do stuff. You can search, without losing focus on the input. Like this feels like a spa. In fact, if one was to go look at the Nux demo, which we based our design on, it is very, very, very similar kind of feeling. You can see what's going on here. The crazy part about this demo is it's all client-side routed and does all that. It's 13.4 kilobytes of JavaScript. And this is not changing while I'm moving around because it's using the server rendering mechanism. And we've only got, a couple common islands used on all the pages here, even going to the details. This is our whole app. And I did that same kind of navigation in a few other JavaScript frameworks between the different apps, go between three of the pages and saw how much JavaScript they were running. I only included things that had client-side routing and the nice single-page app feel. The next version was 190 kilobytes, Nux was 90, Angular 120, and so on. Even SvelteKit was about 35 kilobytes, and SolidStart normal mode would be about the same. Essentially, this approach has married the benefits of the multi-page app and the single-page app, giving us incredible page speed and performance while keeping the experience that we've come to really enjoy. Truth of the matter is, we're just getting started with frameworks, with the framework and with pun opportunities. But you can get started too. NPM and Knit Solid, and that's it. You'll be on your way to creating the next generation of solid websites and applications. Like what you heard today, you can always find all the resources off solidjs.com. You can find me on Twitter at Ryan Carniato. And if you really like nerding out on JS frameworks, I stream weekly on YouTube and Twitch. Thanks. All right, I guess time for some questions. I think you're muted.
Okay, perfect. So now we are tied. So we were muted before, now I'm muted too. No, I see. I never tried the Solid.js. We can also think about a collaboration if you want. Maybe we can make something where we do try to use it.
Sure.
And yes, so let's start. We have some questions before we wrap up. We have around 5 minutes, but I'm sure it will go fast. Yeah, before we go with the questions, be sure to follow Ryan and check on you on Twitter, YouTube, but also Twitch. I think you can find also the Twitch channel somewhere. So Tobiloba is asking, does Solid.js work directly with the DOM, or is it completely server side?
Yeah, it works with the DOM. Its client, at its core, it's very similar to a library like React, except it doesn't have a virtual DOM. It works directly with the DOM. We have SSR, we have universal renderers to work on 3GL or native or whatever. But generally speaking, the same places you'd use React, you can use Solid.
Nice, thank you. And about Tobiloba again, about packages and dependencies. To achieve this sort of SPA-like page, are we using some dependencies for that, for creating this app?
So, as I said, Solid's it's just like I talked about SolidStart today, which is kind of built all on top of Vite, but Solid itself is just a library that you can use with Webpack or Vite or whatnot to kind of get it out there. Generally speaking, the biggest dependency that we have is we have a Babel plugin that we use to transform the JSX. I'd say that would be the biggest core dependency, but technically you can run Solid without a compiler, so you could run it just in the browser, just like a site that you serve from a CDN. I mean, you can do that after a build step, but you can also do it without build if you really wanted to.
Nice, thank you. And let's go with this one. So by ported, which are the main advantages of Solid.js if a team wants to migrate from another framework?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, biggest thing here is our reactive model is based on primitives. We've kind of gotten away from the component rerun model to one where everything is fine-grained updates based on reactivity. Honestly, I give whole talks on this subject. I didn't do that talk today because the focus was on meta frameworks. I can't. That's the pitch I gave at the beginning of this talk is probably the most I can compact in a short period of time. It's a rethink of how we approach building applications in the front end. Even though it looks similar mechanically, we've kind of changed the way things update and work. I know that's not a great description, but it's...
Thank you. Nice. So we have if you have some more time. Yes, we have some more minutes. Let's try with this, can I build enterprise scale apps with a lot of states with the ease?
I'd like to think so. The biggest thing is because our reactivity is kind of decoupled Solid, it's more of a state library that happens to render the DOM than a view library, so to speak. All our state-based primitives are kind of built in. You can build abstractions on top of that, but we because the way reactivity updates in isolation and not these big re-renders and stuff, it's very easy to compartmentalize the state in your app, model it out, and then build sophisticated, complex APIs where certain changes won't affect other parts of the app. I think what Solid's biggest benefit is largely how it scales on update performance. You don't have to worry about things like re-renders or stale closures or whatnot.
Nice. Thank you. And about, let's see, we have, I think, one more. This is interesting, I think. A final question about the learning curve. So from your point of view, because this is, I think, an important part from our framework.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Solid does require a little bit of an upfront learning curve. I don't think it's actually that different from other solutions, but I have to admit our education services like training and stuff is not nearly up to spec. With Solid, you learn about reactivity. And if you learn reactivity, the framework kind of melts away. What I mean is, if you understand the core tenets of Solid's reactivity, you could have built the framework yourself. If you watch my other talks, it becomes very clear. In about 10 minutes, I can show you how you could have built Solid.js yourself if you understand reactivity. But there is that hop. You need to understand reactivity for it to work. We don't kind of masquerade like we're just doing like a compiler to fix plain JavaScript or whatever. This is a kind of pure JavaScript mechanism, kind of like promises are, and you have to learn that API, learn how it works, and then you'll be able to get started on Solid. But luckily for you, if you're coming new to Solid and you've seen some other frameworks, Vue has a very similar reactivity system. And in the last few months, this reactivity system has been sneaking into lots of other frameworks, things like Preact, things like Quick. Even Angular is flirting with the idea of bringing this signals reactivity into their system. So I think it's going to be much more commonplace in the next 6 months to the year.
Thank you so much, Ryan. You got me curious about this framework. So I also like to make this sort of events so I can also learn something new. So I'm honest, I never tried it. And yes, so thank you for your explanation. Thank you for demo. Thank you for being patient and answering everyone. Nice. So let me move this. Be sure to follow Ryan everywhere. I leave the links below. So Ryan, thank you. What's next? Are you about to create some content out of this, or what are you currently working on? And then we wrap up.
Yeah, honestly, SolidStart is still in beta. I need to just finish up getting it out the door to 1.0. You saw those really cool experimental modes. I want to make those a reality. So that's a big thing, and we're also working towards our 2.0 release. So yeah, a lot of really exciting stuff coming for Solid over the next 6 to 12 months.
Nice, thank you. So before we wrap up, fast shout out to daily.dev, which is the organization that organized everything here, and we have been doing this for more than 2 years now with 25 episodes. So this started in January 2021, and we're still here, and we are trying to give this sort of talks when we can basically take some aspects of the development. If you want to support, leave a like on these events, and you can also check daily.dev. It's totally free. You can just check it out. And yes, so Ryan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your demo, your explanations. It was great. So we're about to close today, and see you in February. We don't have the event yet, but we will have it soon. So usually this event is on the last Tuesday of the month. That's it. So this is I think a great way to start the 2023, and that's it. I bragged enough, Ryan, at the beginning, so I'll go with the humble close now. But thank you so much. And of course, I was waiting for that. I'm waiting for too long. Solid presentation. I was waiting for this, and at the end, we got it. So, perfect. Bye, everyone, and thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you so much, also, Jordan. Check the links in the description. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.